Welcome to the 20th edition of the SpareTime Podcast. Can you believe we've actually done 20 of these? Because I can't. I didn't realize it was as many. Sponsored by ADR Wear, as always, and which we appreciate their support of the podcast. And tonight we have another guest from across the Atlantic, another top-level PBA player. Tonight's guest is Chris Barnes. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on.
No, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. So we've been reading some your long list of achievements, and it is pretty long. And I'll start off by asking you some questions about one of them that is in there. You got down as 3 times the U.S. Olympic Committee's Athlete of the Year for bowling. Now, bearing in mind bowling isn't an Olympic sport, how does that work?
Well, we were part of the USOC program back in the 90s, and recognized as such. We're a Pan-American sport within our own Olympic federation. And so 3 of the 4 years I was on the team there, I was considered the player of the athlete of the year in bowling. And then I went on tour shortly after that. So
do you think there's any chance that bowling will eventually become an Olympic sport? Because when you look at some of the Olympic sports, they're probably less of a sport than bowling is in many respects.
We have a lot of things that seem like they would overshadow those kind of things, but in the end, money drives all. And so until we can get organized enough on a worldwide basis and get sponsorships and commercial dollars, and can guarantee that we can create those for a host country, they're going to take chances on sports that have some of that money already built in, even though they seem like, in the big scheme of things, they're much less participated worldwide. They're much smaller on an organizational level, but in the last year and a half, last 3-4 years, our own leadership within the IBF has done significant damage to our reputation. So we'll have to recover from that first.
I mean, on various podcasts, we've had different conversations about bowling and promoting bowling and getting it to the level that everybody would like to see it at. Sure. And one of the sort of the comparisons we made on previous podcasts is bowling against a sport like darts, and so, well, how come something as relatively simple as darts can get such a large number of people into a room to watch a darts tournament where it's not so easy with bowling? And it's come up with a suggestion. Well, one of the suggestions I made is that, it's easy to put a dartboard up, lots of cameras and lots of tables, and, fill everybody with beer. Where in a bowling alley, it's not quite so simple, because with the exception of maybe South Point in Vegas, there's not really any bowling centers that are really equipped for a decent number of spectators. I mean, do you think that's a factor?
That's a contributing factor for sure, but it's not like we're filling up the places that we're in right now. Part of our problem is bowlers don't support bowlers. We don't, as a group, maybe support the brands that support bowling as well as we should either. And so all of those things kind of come into play as well. Certainly, they've created a party atmosphere within darts that makes it entertaining to be a spectator, and therefore it becomes entertaining to watch as well. And I think that's a place where we can improve for sure. We get stuck between tradition and maybe trying to move into the next era. The league bowling from the PBA is probably the closest thing to trying to get to some of those kind of that type of atmosphere, because Portland, Maine creates it when we bowl there, but it's been a tough thing to create anywhere else.
Yeah, I think it's just strange that bowlers don't support their own sport. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I think if they, if more people did that, it would certainly help to push it on. But watch the PBA match play. There's a lot of excitement in that, and a lot of people do watch that. And, I sometimes wondered it, leading up to the match play when you've got like however many lanes with however many bowlers all going on at the same time. It's difficult for something like that to be able to focus on anything because there's so much happening. So, do you think maybe there's some sort of a format change or maybe more match play would be needed to help that along?
Well, I mean, we did that a while back when the Microsoft guys took over, but the world wasn't ready yet. Where we went to basically all best of 7 matches and 2 matches at a time, and you stream them all the time, but the world was still on dial-up, or too much of the world was. And so it just didn't take off in popularity like you'd hoped on that side of it. And and again, bowlers in general have not jumped on that platform, either whether it's Bowl TV or Flow Bowling or Extra Frame, to the degree that we'd like, would like that to happen. That would allow some opportunities to grow and do some different things. But I agree. I think it's much more exciting to watch a best of 7 match than it is to watch qualifying. And you get stuck between the best players, of course, want to have total pins in all of the games, and they're going to end up at the top more often that way. But if we're not a better entertainment than we've been, then it's going to be tough for us to grow and get to those places you're talking about.
Yeah, and in the UK and probably outside of the US, it's pretty hard to watch bowling because you have to subscribe to something like Bowl TV, and you have to make an effort. I mean, Bowl TV has an international channel, and talking on a personal level, when I first subscribed to it, couldn't really find anything on it. Then somebody told me there's an international version that I need to be subscribed to. Or, well, I was subscribed to Bowl TV anyway, but I needed to watch it on the international website, and there was a lot more on there than there was on the normal Bowl TV channel. And I think it's because of this lack of TV coverage outside of the US, it does make it pretty difficult.
It's still a work in progress, because I know obviously mostly it's like sort of PBA streamed on Fox, but I know when the playoffs were on, I believe they were on CBS, they weren't actually streamed on Bowl TV. So it's still it's not full coverage, if that makes sense. So for people like me, I literally couldn't watch bowling unless you find a dodgy link or something like that. But obviously that doesn't really help bowling.
Yeah, no, there's always issues, and Fox is selling them to their international distributors, and Sky Sports tends to buy some of that, when we're on Fox Sports, but not always. And if they don't, then that's a huge distribution, channel that gets missed. And so it's not always easy. There's been talk about, creating their own YouTube channel and doing everything like that and going through for free, but there's a lot of risk involved, and can you monetize it enough to make it worth it?
Yeah,
certainly. You stated bowlers don't promote the sport. That certainly couldn't be said of yourself, because you have your own YouTube channel, Beef and Barnsey. So how did that come about?
Basically, with COVID hit, and Stu and I were sitting around bored, and we just don't like being bored. We both represented our companies for quite some time, and we felt like it was they were continuing to pay us even though it was during the pandemic, and we felt like that we needed to do something to help them however we could, and that's kind of where it was born. It started off, we were doing it every day for a while because we didn't have anything else. There just wasn't anything else to do, and it's taken off a life of its own and morphed into his own thing. We're really a channel of, you can ask us anything, and we will do our best to give to a pretty informed answer, and try and really educate that group that wants to know something more, and wants to know more than from a video or from a real generalized source. So we really enjoy doing it. Stu is pretty good at talking, and so that works out good for both of us.
I think I mean, I don't usually get a lot of time to watch a lot of stuff like that, but your podcast is probably one of the few that I do watch a lot of. And I think it takes a different approach. I know, for like us, for example, I wouldn't be in a position to advise on balls or whatever because, I mean, I'm still learning myself and everyone's learning. But two people like you and obviously Stu who have such great knowledge of bowling, you know, your reputation in the game is huge. Your knowledge of the products are huge as well. I find watching your podcast, it's almost like an hour coaching lesson in a way because you're kind of getting educated about what balls do and what you should look for. And you know, was that the approach that you'd set out to start with, or is that just kind of how
We didn't really know where it was going to go to begin with, you know, and then we ended up on StreamYard just like you, and you know, the comments started coming in, and we just kind of answered whatever came in. And at first, we were doing a lot more guests and a lot of things like that. And you know, when there's nothing going on, though, it gets tough to bring in the same people again and have something new. But that's where our area of expertise is. You know, we're not going to drag a camera around and see, you know, life on the tour of two guys that are married with kids. It's not a particularly exciting adventure, you know. When Brad and Kyle make their first or second show, there's a level of excitement, or somebody in the house makes an early show. There's a level of excitement that's different than when, you know, I make my 94th show. You know, the wins are always exciting, but the process up to it, you know what, I've gone through that. Stu's gone through it a lot more times. And so it's a different thing. And so it's not as relatable when, you know, a 40 or 50-year-old guy does that versus those guys that are just jumping out on tour. And so we're not going to do that side. I don't think it would be interesting, nor do I want to drag a camera around all the time like that. But I do think we've accumulated enough knowledge that we can help people make informed choices. You know, we're trying to help everybody avoid the $250 mistake or a pound mistake, as the case might be. But, you know, balls are expensive. And, you know, that's our job to kind of figure out what they do best, and how they best fit inside that arsenal. And hopefully we do a good job of helping people learn so we can help them make a choice that's best for them.
I think, you know, what you do in allowing people to ask questions is great, because bowling is quite a unique sport, because the fans, the bowlers, can get access to the top level players in a way that you can't in most other sports. So I think that is what was quite unique about bowling.
And that's what we're hoping. You know, that it is tricky you're not going to get Rory or Scheffler or Morikawa or Mickelson to come on and answer questions for an hour twice a week. But we enjoy it. In the end, that's basically what it. Bowling is not such. We don't make so much money that we can afford to be above anyone else, or you know, ignore the fact of how we got here, and that the people are why you're here to begin with. And if we can't grow that base and help that base get bigger, then how can the PBA or professional bowling or Olympic bowling get bigger?
So, coming to yourself, you know, how did you get started in bowling? Where did your bowling journey start?
When I was a kid, my dad took me to bowl a couple of times. Actually, the first ball I threw was a house ball with 5 fingers in it, and that's the only reason I threw it, because it had 5 fingers, and I have no idea why. I was 6 or 7 years old. I started bowling league basically when I was 8, and I didn't do much more than just bowl the 3 or 6 games a week until I got out of high school, and played a bunch of other sports and was pretty good at a couple of them. But Division II basketball wasn't really what I wanted to go do, and so I turned my eyes on bowling and kind of went after it full force from then on. A little behind the curve when I started, but being around a lot of great players at Wichita State and great coaching, you know, I was able to make up some of the ground on a lot of people.
So is basketball something that sort of runs in your family? Because I know Ryan, when we had him on, he plays basketball as well.
Yeah. It was my dad's love. I loved to play as well. Genetically, we were maybe not well suited to be professionals at that, but yeah, we both loved to play. It was something we played up, through the teenage years and then he got too good. So, and, but that was a first love. And then bowling actually came after that. And Ryan has followed pretty much that same suit.
Yeah. So, like you said, everyone sort of, just starts bowling when they're really young and they kind of end up doing it. But everyone sort of has like the youth years where they're bowling, they're just finding their feet, finding out whether they like it. But for a lot of people, there's this sort of one switch moment where they go, this is kind of something I can do like for real. Like I can make a career out of this.
Yeah.
Is that the same for you?
I didn't really know, and I didn't go on tour until I was 28. So I bowled in college first. At that time, to bowl in the national team, you had to be an amateur. And so I kept my amateur status. I was traveling the world. I came over and bowled the British Open a few times. So I was going to Europe. I was going to Asia a little bit, bowling high rollers and team challenges and all these other amateur tournaments. And I could make a pretty good living. And then with Team USA, at the time, it was about 100 days a year. And so I was traveling the world and getting exposed to things I would never get exposed to otherwise. And the tour wasn't doing fantastic. And it was, the whole Hall of Fame was out there. Walter and Parker and Albie and Pete and Norm and Brian Voss and Walter and Couch. I mean, there was the top 24. There was 24 Hall of Famers out there active and still in their prime. So I'd bowled and got a guest spot enough times that I wasn't under any illusion of where I was at or that I could go out there and dominate on that tour. I knew how great they were. So I wasn't in a hurry at the beginning, especially with Team USA. But after 4 years of that, I decided it was time to go see if I could, bump heads with the best of the best and see where it would fall out. And took a year and a half, and then it's gone pretty well since then.
Mm-hmm. So there's obviously, like you said, you mentioned you came over to England a few times. And the first time I really remember ever hearing of you, and we're hearing of professional bowling in general, I suppose, I must have been about 8 or 9. I just started bowling maybe 2-3 years ago, and it was a Weber Cup in, I believe, 2015 or 16. And there's actually a picture, I think, at least anyway. I'll pop it up on the screen now if there is. But there's a picture of me and you when I was like 9 on the stage at the Weber Cup. And I think that was so important for bowling because that was, for me, the moment where it was kind of, like these people can bowl on a stage in front of like 100, 200 people. Like, this is great. How important do you think things like the Weber Cup was to go to different countries that maybe don't have bowling as such a big sport and kind of spread the word?
Well, I think it was important because that's all I heard about overseas, internationally. They didn't actually show the Weber Cup in the U.S. very often. But anytime I traveled, that's all I heard about. And so Sky Sports did a great job with that. That was one of the most fun events of the year. For sure. It wasn't that we made a ton of money, but we had, there's a lot of pride involved. It was kind of very much a Ryder Cup type event. And, there's some hope that maybe at some point Emily Fraser might bring it back again. So those of you listening, at Emily Fraser, hit her up, tell her you want the Weber Cup back, and you never know. It's probably too late for me, but I do think that's a fun event to watch. It's a great event to participate in. I think it was a really fun event to be in the crowd of too. Over the years, it took on a life of its own that way as well, and got to be more and more fun. Well, not as much as a visitor, but the atmosphere was electric, and we really had a good time there.
Yeah, it was definitely, like you said, it was fun for you bowling, but even me as a little kid watching, I mean, me with ADHD, my attention span was horrible, but I remember sitting there, be like, this is great. One thing I remember, you might remember it as well, was there was 2 guys every year, and they were there every year, who would like wear wigs and stuff, and they'd paint themselves. And I think it was like the European flag or something like that.
Yeah.
And like jumping up and down, like it was great, and it sparked my love for the sport. And especially now, it can if it could continue, what I notice a lot with the younger people coming around, it sounds weird me saying this, but sort of the youth English tour, I'm kind of like the veteran. I've got maybe a year or two left before I'm moving to fully adult stuff. And there's a lot of kids who are coming into YBCs now, and there's no vision of ever, having a career or going professional because there's nothing like the Weber Cup. And for me, that's what, started my love in the sport. And I think it's so important that we need to bring something like that back, not even just in England, but in Europe and the rest of the world as a whole, where there is something that's going on that can give younger people an experience of this is what you can do if you stick at it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a funny spot over there right now with the EBT. Lost some of its leadership there, and so it's trying to get under its feet again. The Lucky Larson is the one big event that guys come over and bowl, but there's not as many as there used to be that are big enough to draw the Simonsons of the world and the Troops and the Marshall Kents and those guys. And we were bowling over there quite a bit for a while. It would be nice to bring that side, that World Bowling Tour back again. That had 3 or 4 tournaments in Europe and 2 or 3 tournaments over in Asia and a couple in the Middle East. And so we could, I think that tour is important for a lot of reasons, for the growth of the sport worldwide and for that opportunity, both Olympic berth and then chances and exposure for players to see what the best guys on the PBA Tour are. From whatever country they are, but they're there and you can see and get an idea of where you're at. And maybe, I think that gives more guys a realistic look at what and where they are and about coming over and making the relationships to make being on the PBA Tour easier.
Yeah, I agree because obviously the PBA Tour, PBA in general, is heavily biased towards bowlers from the US, with a relatively small number from outside the US. And I think that, if there was more sort of events like that where taking place in different parts of the world that may encourage bowlers from different countries to be, to become pro, that maybe wouldn't do that under normal circumstances. I mean, you bowled all over the world. I'm looking at some of your achievements here. You won the Japan Cup in Tokyo. There's a lot in the US, and you bowled all over the world. What do you think is the difference between bowling in the US and bowling in countries outside of the US? Do you think there's any difference in that, or is it just the same game, just different place?
In the end, the game itself is fairly structured, and that's one of the things that Kegel did a fantastic job of, was standardizing some of the lane conditions. I mean, they're not the same, but the window of what they are is a little bit smaller, and so the game is a little more standardized, no matter where you're at in the world from that standpoint. What differs the most is just the structure of the governing bodies in each place. Some places have a very sound and financially stable one that supports players and develops some great players, and that's what you see like in Singapore. That women's team has been the best in the world basically for, or certainly in the top 2 or 3 for decades now. When they come on the PWBA Tour, their players dominate, and they play at an exceptionally high level. And that comes from a governing body structure that's fantastic. They put together a school that kind of identified players, and they built them up organically from a grassroots. And when you can do that, that certainly helps. But the game itself, in the end, is fairly standardized, and so it's not hard to play the game in other parts of the world. Just the things that are around it and how the tournaments and the life around it is certainly a challenge, and that's a barrier to entry for players from Korea who don't speak as much English. The travel, the food, all the little things in between the tournaments certainly make it harder. And that's where those relationships and meeting people and, getting people that can help you navigate through that process, especially the first time until you figure things out. I think that's important. And that's where that World Bowling Tour, I think, really helps.
I think bowling has a bit of an international language because, with Ben he's bowled in different countries, and last year we did the promotion tour. and he was on a team with 3 French bowlers, and there was certainly one of them didn't speak very much English at all, but because we all play in the same game and we know what we're doing, to a certain degree, I felt that the language didn't really matter that much because it was the same game. It was everybody was
same wavelength.
Yeah, everybody's on the same wavelength. So the language barrier was almost secondary, and I think bowling is great for fostering sort of international friendship and relationship because of that.
Yeah, common threads, are things that pull countries and ideologies and kind of overcome religion and biases that we have across the world and kind of make those things unimportant. And I found bowling to be a great kind of ambassador from that standpoint, to where whatever issues that politicians had over different things, that didn't necessarily extend to the players. And we could all play and compete against each other and want to win and be friends after. And you could share a meal and break bread or a drink and, that other stuff that we're really not that much different in the big scheme of things. And you can believe what you want to believe about these things or that things, but we do have this commonality that bonds us and brings us together.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was about to bowl my first TV show, it was a Baker team, and we were on the pair, like the practice pair before, and we'd spent maybe a week with my team who were all French. One of them spoke okay English, and the other two spoke basically none.
Yeah.
And I remember before the TV show, we were all sort of warming up, and I'd thrown 2 or 3 balls, and the guy that spoke the least English just pointed to a ball and went, "Throw that one." And I trusted that my teammates, and I think it's one of those things where you might not be able to understand what they're saying, but you can see what's happening down there and sort of point them in the right direction. And I know this year, I mean, you've got all sorts of nations like Russia and everything like that. But like you mentioned, there's all that there's that common ground where, I suppose, where it may be in like a sport like football or what you'd call soccer, there's not really a time where you can speak, and it's quite fast paced. But I think the special thing about bowling is, obviously, if you're bowling doubles pace, you're bowling here and there or whatever, there's a lot of maybe downtime or time where you're not bowling, and you're kind of stuck on these lanes with people from all over the country for 4 or 5 months of the year, and it's kind of impossible not to make friendships, really.
Well, there's some people that are pretty good at it, but in general, it is there is no defense per se, and so nobody's tackling you, nobody's there's no physical interactions that way to create animosities, and so there is a time to compete and a time to relax, and the competition doesn't necessarily get in the way of friendships afterwards.
I think what you just mentioned was a good example of that. Was last year on the promotion tour, is that you decided to go two-handed, and the person who played a large part in that was a guy from Belgium who didn't speak much English at all.
Yeah, I don't think he spoke a word of English.
Yeah, he spoke a little bit, but he knew what you were trying to do. He even lent you a ball, didn't he? So that's a good example of international cooperation. And I mean, you can explain it yourself, but going two-handed has completely changed your trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, it was with Martin. We were over there, and my one-handed game was terrible. To be honest with you, and I tried bowling two-handed, and Martin was like, maybe you should try it. But obviously, I was bowling with a thumb and etc. And he was like, he literally just went, throw this, and gave me one of his balls to throw in the middle of the block. And it's things like that where you can kind of the off the sort of scale bonding. But as well, I wanted to go back to what you said earlier about how you wouldn't vlog your life because you're a guy with a wife, a kid, and etc. like that. And obviously that's something it's a huge part of your life as well as bowling. I'm just curious what the balance is like, because if you're away competing for 4 or 5 months of the year, it's got to be difficult.
Yeah, well, I wish it was only 4 or 5 months, but right now I'm bowling on the regular tour and the senior tour. So yeah. I've been going since January this year and still have another month to go. It helps. My wife is also in the World of Bowling Hall of Fame has played professionally, has played for the national team, 12, 13, 14 times, enough that I can't keep track. And so she understands all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, the travel, the being on the road is not necessarily a vacation sometimes, and other times it's fantastic. And for us, that's pretty key. And then when the boys were younger, making sure I got home, every couple of weeks, even for a couple of days, and doing that. And now that the boys are, Ryan's out of college now, and his brother's got one more year left, and her making it back out on the road and meeting up with me, and so we get to still spend time together. It's not basically together but separate all the time. That would get pretty old, especially at this age, this many years in. So it's everybody has their normal, and we found a way that makes it work for us. And but the fact she understands the world that I live in, because she's lived in the very same world, certainly helps us and gets by some of the people making up what's going on or what's not going on, and so great communication is a big part of it.
Did you meet your wife through bowling?
Yes. Originally, we bowled on different college teams, and I met her there. And it was a few years later, she was bowling the U.S. Open in the town I lived in. And that struck up a friendship that lasted for a while. And then we both made the national team at the same time, while also between significant others. And that's where the relationship really blossomed. Chance, and like I said, having 100 days a year, it was a chance for us, even though she was in California and I was in Kansas, that we were 1,500 miles apart, but we had a chance to spend some time together and racked up some phone bills back in the day, but ended up working out pretty good.
Yes, I mean, that's a great example of how bowling brings people together. It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't be the same without it. And I chose even to go on tour right after, it would be completely different from that standpoint. But bowling has given our family everything, both of us and our boys now. Ryan's going to try and join the tour this year, and it's just such a huge part of everything we do.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you mentioned that it was a while ago, and you joined the tour, quite some time ago. I mean, I was going to say before I was born, but most things happened before I was born.
That's a polite way of calling me old. I appreciate that. But,
to be fair, though, most things happened before I was born. I mean,
calls me old all the time.
Yeah, but anyway, so when you started, bowling was a lot different to how it is now. The balls were you weren't anywhere near as strong. The patterns weren't anywhere near as advanced, and I think technology in bowling itself has advanced a lot.
I'm not that old. Kegel was doing the lanes on tour when I came out. Reactive balls. It was 1998 when I first went on tour.
Mm-hmm. So, but sort of, nowadays you've got balls that you can throw it, it'll hook out the park and stuff like that. I'm just wondering how it's changed from when you started to sort of now.
Well, I think there's a few things. Oils have gotten thicker, which in theory means that they hold up better. But the reality is they make the ball hook more. Those thicker oils have, they bog the balls down a little bit. The balls are softer than they are. They were on average around 78 hardness back then. Now they're down to 73. Urethane has changed the game tremendously, and especially in Europe. And hopefully at some point we get back to the point where hardness actually matters with urethane balls too, because they'll still get used if they go back to being, above 73 while they're in competition, but not to the degree they are now.
Mm-hmm. So obviously,
lane surfaces are older. They're probably more out of spec. So topography is a much bigger issue than it was with wood when you cut them every year and basically re-leveled them every year. The challenges are just different. Rev rates are much higher. Absorption rates of the balls are much higher, which takes the oil off the lane much faster to go along with the rev rates. And so there's always challenges. The environment always changes, and you either adapt or perish is kind of how it works. But the challenges have changed, although relatively speaking, they're based in the same kind of balls, lane play, rev rate, oils, and then how often, where people are playing and the topography. So it's all kind of back in the same deal. It's just the environment, this time being the players, it has a pretty big effect right now.
Mm-hmm. I think you're one of it's without doubt one of the best bowlers in the world at the moment, if not ever. I'm and I've been trying to figure out for a long time what sets the good bowlers apart from the great and the best bowlers. Mm-hmm. What do you think sets them apart?
There's a couple of things that will make you a great professional, and one's being unique, and that allow you to win, and then there's guys that are really versatile and can do a lot of things really, really well with a high level of repetition, both accuracy, speed, and rotation wise. And that's where you get guys like Norm and Walter Ray and guys like that. Belmo started out as unique and then made himself into a more complete player. And so he still has things he could be better at. I'm not sure he's particularly great at playing straight. But in the world we live in currently, he doesn't have to. And so, he's in a perfect place and a perfect time for him, for sure. A guy like Tommy Jones started out as being, at the higher end of the rev rate and somewhat unique, and then turned himself into a more complete player. Walter Ray, when he first went on tour, actually hooked it a lot, but that's all he did was hook it. Learned how to play straight, and then learned how to do everything else. And made the TV shows he played straight a lot, but he made a lot of shows playing fourth, fifth, and sixth arrow too. So the parts you don't see back in those days. And so, basically until his body started to break down, he was a force for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're an exceptional level. I think I'm just wanting to know what you've done behind the scenes that's got you to this level. Was there anyone specific that's helped you, or?
Well, I treated bowling like I treated other sports. I sought out coaching, and so I've been lucky to be around 8 or 10 of the best coaches, in the world, and certainly in the U.S., but I've used the international coaches as well to gain knowledge from. And then I just treat it like, I would work at it. And not everybody does, because there's nobody making you work at it in bowling. There's not your high school coach, your college coach. There's not 3-hour practice every day. So if you don't want to go practice, you don't have to go practice. But somebody somewhere is. And so by and large, I outworked a lot of people, and I spent a lot of time figuring out how to do things that the best players at something were doing. Whether it's, how is Walter better than me playing straight, and then learned how to do a version of that where I could play straight with him. And then, how can I be more like Tommy Jones, and how can I be more like, something like Pete Weber. There's guys that had tools that I didn't have, and I spent a lot of time trying to add to my toolbox so that basically the lane man couldn't shut me out. And I wasn't, rarely are you as good as somebody who's the best at what they do, but I could be good enough in that window of time until we got to the next thing. And then the next thing, I was better than that person was at the next thing. And I got pretty good at being good, maybe the 5th or 8th best player at a lot of different things. And that let me compete for TV shows and ultimately give me a chance to make those step ladders and have a chance to win a title.
How much importance do you put on your mental game with what you've managed to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad spectrum thing, but you can't overlook it, because like golf, you have to make decisions first. Your perception and perceptive abilities are huge in bowling because it's minute. Is the ball burning up? Is it hooking too much? Is it, is it saving? Is it not hooking down lane because it's burning up, or is it because it's not picking up? You know, what can I do to knock out a half 10? Is it more rotation? Is it less speed? You have to determine a lot of different things, and then you have to have some tools that allow you to do those things and do it in one shot. And so the mental part of both accountability of good shot, bad shot, what you're good at, what you're not good at, how do I get better at those things, but also, hey, what did that ball do? How do I fix that? And then working on those tools so you have that tool available to you is huge. And that's before you get to the part of, wow, this is really important. My heart rate's now gone up 50. How do I control that? Do I need to control it, or do I lean into it? And this is what I do when my heart rate goes up. And there's two different approaches to that as well. Some guys do great at leaning into that high energy, and they skew towards that, being firmer and being more aggressive and playing into that. And some guys are able to let themselves really even out and not get too caught up in the moment and play at a level that's closer to what they play on a average Tuesday versus a weekend show.
So do you take a more holistic approach to the mental game, or do you have any specific techniques that you use, especially when?
Well, I think everybody has some go-tos that you figure out what works for you and what doesn't. You have to try some different things. Breathing's always been a huge part of it, and whether it's those double deep breaths and the long things, but getting your heart rate down and getting that fight or flight instinct under control. For me, getting in the zone was never really my thing. I have a super busy mind. It wants to wander on its own, so I have to keep it occupied with at least one very specific thought. And so in those moments under pressure, I'm going to want to, I got a controlling personality. I'm going to want to control that moment. So in the second frame, I need to be controlling it the same way. And so I have a thought process that goes mostly a swing, a swinger approach process that I use to key on every shot, so that when we get to those moments in the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th frame, that I'm still thinking about those same things versus just kind of going through and letting things go. And then at that time, wanting to really over control things at the end. And that's just who I am. So I had to lean into that part and be in control all the time.
Okay. And now with the PBA 50, what was the transition like to the PBA 50? How does it differ from the PBA?
Well, you see a lot of guys that obviously their bodies did not hold up as well. And you see, but by and large, the PBA 50 is guys that succeeded at life that have now come out to chase a dream afterwards. And then you see some guys like Parker and Walter and Norm who have continued to be great players into their 50s and now 60s, and they're able to continue to compete. But it's a lower. The competition's still high, and the guys are very competitive. But the life and death of making a living, supporting your family, legacy, all the things that we make up as super important in our 20s. That's not really the things that are on the line now. And so it's a more amicable environment, a place where guys get along and there's more laughs and more, there's more fun to be had out here on the 50 tour, and not so much guys really grinding to try and make a living or just stay out there and still be able to chase their dream.
Well, what do you think? Obviously there's a lot of two-handed bowlers around now. And two-handed bowlers are a relatively new thing. 25 years time in the PBA 50. How do you think those two-handed bowlers are going to cope with the stresses and strains of that technique?
They said Mark Roth wouldn't last. They said power players wouldn't last. Guys that hooked it a lot wouldn't last. And there's certainly more strain, but we had never bowled less games than we bowl now competitively. Walter had years where he bowled 1,300 competitive games. That's just on tour. That's now about 5 seasons. So, so we don't end up in that kind of stress. And if you can figure out how to manage your workload in the off times and still be ready to compete at a high level, I think you can bowl for a long time. I do think it's a more athletic move. And so your legs and your back and those things are super important. And so you have to take care of yourself better, but it's not any different than, say, golf. There's not a lot of golfers that look like Craig Stadler or Colin Montgomery anymore. They look like Tiger. And, they're more fit. They're more, they're taller, they're stronger, they're in better shape. And I think, they'll continue to do that. Anybody who plays anything a lot in a row is going to eventually break down. It's a repetitive motion over and over. And if you're not balancing your body out, you're not going to last. And so there's only a few guys that do. And two-handed will be much the same way, because there's, there are stresses that are involved there, but you're naturally getting stronger by just doing them all the time as well. And so.
Mm-hmm. Oh, like my dad said before, you've won a hell of a lot in the time that you've been bowling, and I believe it's 3 major titles and 16 just standard PBA titles, totaling to 19 titles in total on the PBA Tour. What sticks out to you as the most proud one?
I would have said the U.S. Open was probably the biggest thing for me. I'd been on a bunch of shows, but I'd lost a bunch of shows in a row. And I had to strike in the 10th to win, and they were brutal. The lanes they're flat, 40 feet. They're impossible. You have TV, you have a title, you have a major, you have everything on the line. And, I threw one of the best shots of my life, struck in that spot. I still needed 9 spare to win, and I 4-pinned, and then I shot the only 4-pin I ever shot that was actually 100 feet away from me instead of 60 feet away from me. But that thing was so it felt like the lane was twice as long. You talk about mental tricks of having to. I've done this, 10,000 times. Just go. Don't over control this one. And but then getting the bowl with Ryan on TV, and then watching him later on TV, those are some of, there's nothing I would like better than for Ryan to beat every record or accomplishment that I have. And so watching him go through the process and start that process and look like he has a chance that's really cool. Watching Linda win the Queens, doing the color commentary on both the one with the U.S. Open that was in Cowboy Stadium and then the Queens in Detroit, and watching her win that. Those are moments that I really hang on to, probably more so even than my own.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you mentioned about the 4-pin of, you've done it 1,000 times, just go. And everyone that's bowled on TV knows, and even just bowled in general to a competitive standard, knows that there's always an element of pressure at points. How do you sort of control that pressure and sort of, not let it overtake you? Because I know for a lot of people, if you don't deal with it right, then it can be your breaking point.
Oh yeah. I mean, breathing is the best way for me, is really, those deep breaths, holding them. And then actually I take another one on top of it. And those are the ones that get my heart rate back down to within, it's higher, but it's relatively the same. And then it's really just reminding that it's the same game. I have the same thoughts, the same process. That doesn't change. We talk about pre-shot routine as part of that. And the same thing with guys that shoot free throws, they have the same routine. And that's just to automate your mind away from crowd, moment, the theater to the drama. And really, it's most of that pressure is made up. it's made up by ourselves of what's important to us or what we think other people think, or, as I got older and got more comfortable in my own skin, those moments got easier because I wasn't worried about, Joe in New York and what he was going to say, or, I got comfortable. So if it went well, my family was still going to love me. If it went poorly, my family was still going to love me. And in the end, really, only a couple of people actually care what happens if you win or lose. It's a talking point for a couple of days, and then after that, it really doesn't matter to anybody. They're somewhat happy for you if you win. They're somewhat disappointed, or some people are happy when you lose, which is more a reflection of them than it is you. But in the end, it doesn't change really much of anything. It's only important to us. So you get yourself good with what this means to you and where it fits overall. And once bowling doesn't make you a good person, bad person, then those moments really get easier to handle.
Mm-hmm. So just looking here, you've won the Tony Ray's Community Service Award, which it was something that I'd only picked up on the other day when I was researching you. So tell us a bit about this award and sort of what it's for and what you did.
Well, Tony was one of the ultimate really good guys, that we had in our sport. And so, and he did some local things with tournaments and youth and that to help grow the game there. And so we basically got it for two reasons. And I would say it's more of a family award than an individual one, but we've had a Barnes Thanksgiving Classic, which is a youth tournament that annually pays out about $20,000 in scholarships each year. We've had that tournament now. We're in our 21st year, I believe it is, coming up. And then the other one is we ran a charity for diabetes, for type 1 diabetics. Largely that's the type that children get, but completely insulin dependent. And so we ran a Strikeout Diabetes charity event for 6 or 7 years, and then we still raise money for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation every year. And so largely we got it for those two reasons, and that's much more of a team award than it is something that I per se won. Linda's had a huge part to do in both of those things.
So just coming back, reversing a little bit down to the previous question about pressure and that sort of thing. What difference do you feel that the TV cameras make to the pressure that you feel in a tournament?
Well, I think it's all up to. I think the crowd actually adds more than the TV cameras do, and I thought we saw that during COVID when there wasn't crowds allowed. We saw a lot of guys make their first show that played very well, ran the ladder, multiple matches, no big deal. It almost never happens. Because the atmosphere and the extra intensity and the electricity that's in when there's hundreds of people in that atmosphere, you notice that way more than the cameras. I mean, at some point you can go, hey, there's a trophy and there's money and there's a million people watching on TV and there's, all these other things and Randy's voice and, this is the thing I watched on TV and you put yourself there. But really it's the atmosphere and the charged up energy of the crowd that changes things the most. It makes it the hardest to get yourself back to a relatively calm, qualifying type moment where there's not nearly so much of that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying because I mean, when Ben was doing the promotion tour last year in France, the thing that struck me is normally when you're bowling, there's lots of noise around you. There's the noise of the pins, people talking, and just a generally very noisy environment. But on the TV finals, all noise had to cease when that player was taking his shot. And it was almost like an unnatural environment because it was like
it's very unnatural. That's where everybody goes, oh, well, your pros concentrate. When you hear noises that are unusual, we all react. If you hear a gunshot, you instantly reflex. Fireworks, a door slam, any of that stuff. Well, things that you never hear in a bowling center, a cough, a sneeze, somebody tapping their toes. Those are all unusual sounds. And so nothing is louder in a bowling center than silence, because you hear all these things that you never hear when it's quiet. It is the most unusual sound in bowling is no sound.
Yeah. No, that's exactly how I felt, because it was just such an unnatural environment when everybody just stopped making a noise and the whole place was just completely quiet.
100%.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, yeah, that's almost the best way to put it. It's just so unusual that it doesn't make any sense. But any kind of unusual, I actually like it better when they cheer the whole time, because then it becomes white noise. Then it becomes positive energy, and then it plays more into my background, which is that basketball background. And you can use that energy, and you can use that as a positive, and it stays fairly constant versus up and down, and it's much tougher to manage that bouncing around part. And so I like Portland. I like the team event stuff. I like the Weber Cup when they have all that going on. I love that atmosphere, and I love that energy. But it's certainly a thing to get used to at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. I just want to. It's obviously I'd argue that it's the biggest achievement you could get as a bowler, and you've been inducted to the PBA Hall of Fame. Tell us what that was like to find out that you've been inducted.
It was weird for me because I always put it off. I didn't really want. I didn't want to be in a Hall of Fame until I was done. Mm-hmm. It was something that I could keep driving, and I could keep trying to achieve, and I get more, and I wanted more, and I wanted more, and add here. And even though I knew pretty much once I got past 10 titles, it's pretty likely I was going to get in the Hall of Fame. It's still a kind of a surreal moment when you get the phone call from the commissioner and go, "Hey, I have some good news for you." Tom Clark calls me up, and I go, "Holy." And then you instantly have this flashback of all these things that have happened over 20 years that allow that to happen. And it's it is surreal. It's hard to put into words, what it is. And I'm not sure it means any one thing other than accumulation of a lot of hours and days, months, years of practice and working and coaching. And, when I saw it, I had moments of big tournaments and big moments of wins, but it also went back to all those guys those coaches that helped me get better and work through my stubbornness to get me to a better place. And I think it was more encompassing than just performance. It was all the other things that led up to it. The support of Linda and how much she helped and how much she coached and how much all the things she did to allow me to be on the road and compete without worrying about the myriad of other things that happen. And so, that for me, that's what it was. It was kind of a flashback moment of everything that had happened to get there and all the crazy things that could have gone differently that all led into, being able to be in that moment.
Awesome. So obviously, like you mentioned, there's a lot of coaching and advice that goes into it. I'm just wondering what's the best sort of advice you could offer to someone like in a position like me who's aspiring to get to the PBA one day?
I think you work on your base. The reason to have a really solid physical game isn't just to be good at one thing. It's so that base is repeatable, and then you can be good at a lot of things. And once you're good at a lot of things, then you don't have to be the environment doesn't have to fit you to be good. You can adapt to whatever's there, and that's when you're technically sound. That's what makes Don Barrett. His physical game is exceptionally sound. So when there's a change in philosophy of a lane man, he can adapt to it. He can change his loft or his rotation or his speed, or rev rate or hand pressures. He can do all these different things because he is in great position to do all those things, and then can dial up whatever the right combination is. And so I always work on my base from there, and then I always work on the versatility after that. And you just keep working at the things, because everything skews. Now it's all more rev rate and more two-handed. But so what those guys are doing, is it more end over end roll? Is it more rotation? Is it more loft? Is it more? But add all those things too, because at some point all of them will be useful.
So one final
make yourself a great spare shooter.
Second.
Second
one.
Second what?
Second final question.
The second final question. Okay. Yes, it is a second final question. You're right. But one final question from me. He's going to ask the last one. When it's all over, when you finish bowling and many years to come, hopefully, what legacy would you like to leave behind? What would you like to be known for?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I would like to, I think it's funny because I think even when I was probably in one range the best player at the time, I wasn't the best winner at the time. So obviously I won't be known as that, but I was one of the smartest players of my generation. Technically sound, physically sound, and then I understood the game at a pretty high level. And then as we've gone on, hopefully I've helped pass that along and shared it, and helped bring the level of knowledge past myself and past my family, and help make the game a little bit better by sharing the myriad of mistakes I made over the years. I think that's the only way you learn, really, is you don't learn from winning. You mostly learn from losing. And so for better or for worse, I've done a lot of that. And took stock in what those things were, and despite the narrative at times, I mostly lost different ways. And so over time, I found a lot of different ways to play, and some of those worked really well, and some of them I figured out that those weren't great options or things like that. So yeah, hopefully that I leave the game in a better place than I brought it, and whether that's through shared knowledge or in some cases people wanted to do some of the things I did. Either way, and hopefully my son and then my son's son are all better than I am and than he is.
Mm-hmm. So the final question, I think it's such an important question, because if we didn't ask this, well, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to Mika. So who, if you could nominate anyone to help bring on the Spare Time podcast, who do you think we should bring on next?
I don't know who all's been on. Have you had Dom on?
We haven't had Dom on, no.
I mean, that's obviously that's a guy who shares a lot. Maybe the other guy would be the Swedish kid who can throw it. He's kind of he got a lot of notice for being able to throw it two-handed both ways, back up and forward. I mean, their whole team is right now. Actually, they're having quite the run at the U21s, but his name escapes me at the moment. But
it's Carl Eklund, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, and part of his process, and Sweden is another one of those countries that does have a structure that's going to lead up into a lot of good players. And if countries want to get better, there's a couple of places that I think really do it right. The U.S., we do it with just numbers. We just have more people, and eventually people get better and they get around each other, and that groups then they make each other better through competition, sometimes more, and we're getting more and more coaches, which helps. But from a true organizational structure, the fact that Sweden and Singapore have that many and with that relatively small population is impressive.
Chris, it's been great. I'd like to thank you for your time this evening. Whereabouts in the US are you at the moment?
I am in Manassas, Virginia, which is pretty close to Washington, D.C., actually.
Okay, so you're about 5 hours behind it because about 7 minutes past 10 at night here. So
Yeah.
it's about dinner time there. But yeah, we'd like to thank you for taking an hour out of your time, of your busy schedule. It's been really interesting. And we wish you the best of luck in the PBA 50 and everything else that you're going to do from here on in, Chris.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, it's been a year that's been solid, but not spectacular. And so hopefully we can pull off a few wins here at the end. And, that part never gets old. Winning's always fun.
We'll be watching you on Bull TV and, looking forward to what you're going to achieve next. So, Chris Barnes, thank you very much for coming on this Spare Time podcast. That's the end of another Spare Time podcast sponsored by ADR Wear. If you like what you've heard on this episode, then don't forget to like or subscribe. And we'll be back along quite soon with another Spare Time podcast, episode number 21. So for me, Nigel, and him, Ben, you got it right this time.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks. I'll be watching for you too, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Much appreciated. We'll see you all later. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.